countries have taken advantage of us, the likes of which nobody even thought was possible for many, many decades, And, that has to stop.
And our response to these latest tariffs is to fight, to protect, and to build.
We think we're going to be able to cut a deal, Donald Trump style, to ensure the security of this territory, but also the United States of America.
They do not need to take control of Greenland, and we're not going to agree to it because the people of Greenland don't want to become Americans.
Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Tonight on America Decides, phone a friend? Well, maybe. President Trump and new Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney connect on the phone for the very first time. That conversation comes after the president, that is to say President Trump, announced new tariffs on foreign cars and car parts implicating trade with Canada, to be sure. Today, the president sounded a bit more positive about the relationship with our neighbors to the north. The Prime Minister of Canada, well, judge for yourself.
We're going to end up with a very good relationship with Canada and a lot of the other countries. Some we probably won't. It won't be so pleasant.
Canada is strong, but we're even stronger when we are united. And our response to these latest tariffs is to fight, to protect, and to build.
Speaking of tariffs, there was quite a bit of turmoil in the markets over tariffs. Investors dumped stocks, and the Dow dropped hundreds of points, more than 700, as you can see there. Uncertainty grows around U.S. trade policy, and there is a more grim outlook on inflation. Meanwhile, consumer sentiment fell to its lowest level in more than 2 years. Workers and laborers and consumers appear worried about the direction of the overall U.S. economy. Also, talking a takeover. Vice President Vance and Second Lady Vance visit a U.S. military base in Greenland, while President Trump says taking the Danish territory is, quote, very important for the peace of the world. I want to start tonight with Ed O'Keefe at the White House. Ed, catch us up on the call between Mark Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister, and President Trump, and what it might portend.
Well, it finally happened, Major. There had been reports the last 2 days about whether or not this was going to happen or if it had already happened. And coming out of it, it seems the president seems to like Mark, as he called him, Mark Carney, the current Prime Minister of Canada, saying that ultimately we're going to have a positive relationship, and seemed to otherwise let it go, publicly at least. Got to remember that right now Prime Minister Carney is in the midst of a re-election or election fight, depending on how you want to define it. He actually has to run for a seat himself in Parliament because he doesn't have one right now. It's a long story. But you have to see his participation in this through that lens, that he is very much wrapped up in his own political future. And so talking tough and continuing to talk about the idea that Canada has to be more self-reliant or seek other alliances around the world is part of his pitch, that he essentially is a technocrat who once ran the Central Bank of Canada, the Central Bank of Britain, or England, made a living as a executive and a banker that has demonstrated to Canadians, at least according to public opinion polls, that he seems best equipped to deal with the United States, has to continue to talk tough and be serious and somewhat strong about it all. And so he seemed to do that. Trump, of course, someone you and I both know, likes guys that talk tough negotiators. And so in essence, what the president seemed to be signaling today is that they're going to put it off until after April 28th, when Canadians are set to decide which party will control Parliament. Important to point out, ever since the president started this talk of annexation and of tariffs, the ruling Liberal Party came from a 20-point deficit to the opposition Conservatives, and now is forecasted in recent polling this week to probably get just enough seats to potentially take the majority and wouldn't even need to form a unity government, all thanks to Donald Trump. So how Carney deals with him in the next few weeks will determine who controls Canada.
Ed, keeping our political gaze ever northward, let's talk about Greenland and the vice president's trip, what it was about, the context around it, and also some of the conversation that the vice president had about the Signal chat room that is attracted justifiably so much attention here in Washington for the week.
So initially, we'd learned earlier this week that the Second Lady of the United States and one of the Vance children, plus the National Security Advisor, were going to take trips, plural, to Greenland. By the end of the week, it was one trip, and it only lasted a few hours, and they all went together. And best we can tell, Major, they didn't actually meet a Greenlander. They only went to the U.S. Space Force base in northern Greenland, spent a few hours there learning about the operations, and are now on their way back. There were reports in the Danish media up in Greenland this week that there had been advanced staffers in Greenland, trying to find locals willing to meet with Mrs. Vance, and that these Americans that were doing this work were repeatedly rebuffed. So that may have something to do with why it is this was such a quick trip, and one that only went to the Space Force base and didn't involve what we had originally been told would be attending a dog sled race, because I guess that's one of the things they do up there, and there is a big one this week. At the end of a briefing, he did speak with the reporters who were traveling, and he was asked about his participation in that Signal group chat that was revealed this week by the Atlantic magazine, and the vice president had this to say about the conversation that had unfolded over those texts. Take a listen.
What I saw in that Signal chat, and of course what I've seen in the president's senior national security team, is that sometimes we all agree and sometimes we all disagree, but it's important that we all have an honest conversation amongst ourselves and with the President of the United States about what we think is the best interest of the national security of the United States of America.
And that is in speaking specifically to the fact that he raised some concerns in these chats about, A, whether or not these strikes should be conducted at all, B, whether we were in essence doing something on behalf of Europe, since more of its commercial shipping goes through the Red Sea and passes by Yemen and had been threatened by Houthi rebels, and then raised questions about how exactly this was going to be sold to or explained to the American people. Now, all of that is the kind of substantive, meaty policy and messaging conversation that very well does happen in administrations when they're making big decisions like this, especially around military operations. But normally it happens in the Situation Room or the Oval Office behind guarded doors and not on unsecure, commercially available apps. And, of course, that was the big difference. And also not surprising that a vice president might play devil's advocate. You covered the Bush years. Former Vice President Joe Biden always raised concerns during the Obama years, especially about military operations. So it's no surprise a VP would do that. It's just that we got to see it, in essence, play out over text messages when normally it's private conversations.
We got to see it, and lots of other people, not all of them friends of the United States or our national security priorities, saw it too. Ed O'Keefe at the White House, thanks so very much. Jolene Kent joins me now to discuss the markets, tariffs, and kind of a wild day on Wall Street. Jolene, break it down.
Hi, Major. That's right. We saw the S&P 500, that broader index, tumble by about 2%. You saw major auto stocks get hit by this anxiety that is driving through the markets right now about three particular things: consumer behavior, inflation data, as well as what tariffs could bring next week. So as we look at what happened today, you saw the Dow down 1.7%, the NASDAQ down almost 3%, and the S&P 500 tanking that 2% that we just talked about. But what we see overall is a lot of this is pegged on PCE data. We're talking about personal consumer expenditures. That's the favorite data point on inflation for the Federal Reserve, which of course controls interest rates. And basically one great example that we saw that really materialized here in February, people spent 10% more on groceries, and they spent 15% less on going out to eat. And so that kind of tells you where consumer sentiment might be when it comes to those week-to-week expenses. And that's where you see a lot of this hedging and concern about the overall uncertainty about personal financial situations, as well as what things are going to cost going forward, Major.
And Jolene, you spent a lot of time in this space. I try to keep my ears and eyes open to this space, meaning the stock market, economic indicators, and data. And one of the things that's emerged, certainly in the last month, is a sense that the market doesn't know how to price either the tariffs or expected consumer reaction to it. So they don't know where to go, and they don't know where investments might best land. That seems to be driving a lot of this volatility.
Yes, uncertainty is the word that I keep hearing from so many of the experts, economists, consumers, small business owners, tech CEOs and executives who I've been talking to over the past several days. Where is this going to go? We still don't have clarity, for example, on possible reciprocal tariffs that may come as early as next Tuesday or next Wednesday on April 2nd. And so all of this has companies feeling very uncertain. One small business owner that I know who works in components and sort of widgets and supplies was saying that he wished that he knew exactly what was coming, or at least more of a semblance of such a thing, so he could deal with his Canadian trading partners better. And as a result, you see, Canadian leadership acting before we know exactly what's going to be laid out next week. So it's that uncertainty is rocking a lot of people, both psychologically and in terms of their earnings calls and their stock prices and so forth.
When there is uncertainty, there is typically a flight of capital to safety. Capital just doesn't know where the safest place is right now. Jolene Kent.
Well, it's interesting. Actually, gold did very well today, hitting some all-time highs.
The old reliable, precious metals. Jolene Kent, thank you very much.
Thanks, Major.
Here's a part of the story that Ed and I were just talking about. Not what national security officials in the Trump administration were talking about, but where. On an unsecured app. Israeli officials, this is important, are reportedly furious over that signal chat leak between the Trump administration national security officials about military strikes against Houthi targets in Yemen. Sources tell CBS News Israelis had provided intelligence to the United States about a high-value Houthi target entering his girlfriend's house. Those target details were included on that extensive group chat. Those familiar with this matter tell us information that was revealed has now compromised an Israeli intelligence source. That's why all of this matters, among other reasons. The president takes aim at some of the nation's most powerful law firms. Scott McFarland and our legal contributor, Jessica Levinson, join me next to talk about the ramifications right here on America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Now, I'm going to go through a lot of law firm names and some legal machinations, but I promise you we're going to get to the meat of this in a second. Two law firms based here in D.C. are suing to block an executive order signed by none other than President Trump, that's who signs executive orders, that strips their attorneys' security clearances and ends their interactions, all interactions, with the federal government. Wilmer Hale and Jenner Block are the latest law firms to bring a legal challenge against the Trump administration. A judge temporarily blocked parts of a similar executive order targeting Perkins Coie. That's another law firm, after it introduced its own lawsuit earlier this month. The Trump administration rescinded an order that was targeting Paul Weiss after that law firm pledged to provide $40 million in free legal services to causes the Trump White House supports. In a similar move today, Skadden and Arps, that's another law firm, agreed to complete $100 million in pro bono work for, again, causes the Trump administration favors, this to avoid becoming the sixth law firm targeted by an executive order. Okay, the preliminaries are out of the way. Scott McFarland joins me here on the set. Jessica Levinson joins me now from Los Angeles to break all this down. Scott, cut to the chase. What are the implications here?
Let me start off by saying unequivocally, I think Jessica, Major, and Scott would be a good sounding law firm. A high-powered arsenal you'd want in your camp. So these settlements...
I'll be of counsel.
There you go. These settlements,
paralegal.
be it $100 million, be it $40 million, are nevertheless, according to critics of the administration and critics of the deals, incentives to go after more law firms, because clearly the administration's been able to mechanize this to the benefit of the administration. They now have law firms in their arsenal. So we'll start with that. The people who have been in part of the firms that are challenging in court, Wilmer Hale, Jenner and Block, Perkins Coie, say they're fighting this fight not just for themselves, but for the others, so that they dissuade future actions against future firms. But here's the bottom line. This is no longer a Washington, D.C. or a law firm story. If you chill enough law firms from taking on the federal government, if you scare off enough law firms, somebody in America who has trouble with a veteran's benefit, a Social Security check, lost their federal job, has a back pay issue, is not going to be able to find a lawyer to take the case. And that's a problem, no matter where you live.
A big-time, experienced, aggressive attorney.
And Jessica can speak to this much better than me, but this is some pretty tricky stuff. Challenging the federal government. You need not just the manpower, but the expertise of a trained lawyer.
Jessica, we'll get to the intricacies of the kind of law firms and the kind of legal practice you need to take on the federal government in a second. But as I read it, there are 3 of the first 10 Bill of Rights amendments implicated. The First Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, and the Sixth Amendment. Am I right about that?
I think that's right, and probably in that order. And I want to emphasize everything that Scott said, exactly right. I mean, when it comes to the moment we are in our country now, where we see that law firms are really the ones taking the cases to push back against an administration that is embracing a view of executive authority that's broader than, in my view, anything we've seen in recent history. Law firms are part of the opposition to the Trump administration, part of the question of how much, if at all, any of the branches will push back against the administration. Because right now, it's not Congress pushing back against the executive branch. It is largely judges, but judges can't act alone. Judges only act when a case is brought to them. And so if cases aren't brought to them, then we do have a real question as to whether or not we have essentially folded into the idea that we don't have co-equal branches and that the executive branch can basically do whatever it wants, regardless of what the Constitution says. Now, I've gone a little far afield from your question. Do I see First Amendment questions, Fifth Amendment questions, and Sixth Amendment questions? The answer is yes, and we can talk about all those in detail. But that's what these firms are arguing, and that's why there have been some temporary restraining orders put in place against these executive orders.
Jessica, take the constitutional ball I've handed you. First, Fifth, and Sixth. Go.
So when we're talking about the First Amendment, we're talking about speech, we're talking about association, we're talking about the right to petition the government. When it comes to law firms, obviously, we're talking about the right to associate with not just each attorney, but also with clients. We're talking about the right to advocate for your client's perspective. And we're talking about the right, again, here to petition the government to say, we don't think what you're doing is correct. One thing I want to highlight with respect to the First Amendment here is that law firms are saying this is the worst type of First Amendment discrimination. It's viewpoint discrimination. When I teach the First Amendment, I say, if there's one thing we should be most worried about, it's something called content-based restrictions, and in that, viewpoint-based restrictions, because it's the government saying, be quiet because I don't like what you are saying. The other concerns deal, of course, with any due process rights, the fact that these law firms were not provided with notice, an opportunity to be heard, and an opportunity to contest what the administration is trying to accomplish here.
And Scott, this has to be having or creating a kind of mind-bending conversation in the legal circles of Washington, D.C., because some law firms are taking a shortcut. They're like, what do we need to negotiate, and what's the price?
And how are you scaring off your current clients when you're having these conversations? Are you at risk of losing clients just because your name is bandying about, whether you're cutting a deal or not cutting a deal? These are businesses that require access to government buildings, access to government clients, and security clearances. If you take away any of those three, that's a death sentence for a law firm. And other law firms want to stay off the radar. So you have a metastasizing issue here. Let's see if the settlements end the spread or further the spread.
And some of this, Scott, falls into something that you heard a lot the last 2 or 3 years in relationship to a lot of things and grievances against the government in Washington, the deep state, the idea that there's this cabal. Well, if someone is harmed in the D.C. area or anywhere in the country, and the harming agent is the federal government, and they need a powerful lawyer, they may find it harder, maybe impossible, or certainly more difficult to get what they need.
And you can't go it alone. If you're a federal worker and you have a grievance, you lost your job or you lost your pay unfairly, try taking that to court. That is a Herculean undertaking and probably cost prohibitive, so you're not going to do it. Can't find a lawyer, you can't fight the fight. But if we can quickly put that graphic back up of the 5 law firms, it's worth emphasizing for effect the Skadden law firm. The reason they're on the radar, the reason they're on that graphic, Elon Musk put them on blast on Twitter because he's concerned about their efforts to protect those who protected the 2020 election.
The word that comes to mind, retribution. Scott MacFarlane and Jessica Levinson, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. Powerful earthquake near Bangkok, Thailand, collapses building and sends people running for their lives. Hundreds, we are sad to report, are feared dead. The latest next, right here on America Decides. Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. Now to Southeast Asia, where rescue crews are searching for survivors after a powerful earthquake killed at least 154 people across Myanmar and Thailand. CBS News' Tina Kraus has a story.
Rescue teams in Thailand used headlamps and their bare hands to comb through this collapsed building in Bangkok into the night. The 30-story skyscraper that was under construction barreled to the ground Friday after a powerful 7.7 magnitude earthquake rattled the region.
The most important thing is, how to rescue those people. It's a great tragedy.
At this high-rise hotel, water from a rooftop pool gushed over the sides as the building shook. American Deborah Poonmache was relaxing in her Bangkok home at the time.
I was in my lazy boy, and all of a sudden it moved back and forth, and then it toppled over, and I hit my head on the table.
The quake was centered across the border in Myanmar near the country's second largest city, Mandalay, reducing mosques and other structures to rubble. People at this airport ran for cover as portions of the ceiling came down. This video shows what was left after a bridge standing for 90 years crumbled into the river. Amid the devastation, Myanmar's military regime made a rare appeal for international assistance.
The United Nations system is mobilizing to help those in need.
Both Myanmar and Thailand have declared states of emergency as residents deal with the disaster and brace for potential aftershocks. Tina Kraus, CBS News.
President Trump signed an executive order last night aimed at ending collective bargaining rights for many government workers. The order applies to workers across many federal agencies, including the Departments of State, Defense, Justice, and Health and Human Services. Earlier today, I spoke to the president of the United Automobile Workers, Shawn Fain, about President Trump's efforts. Since you brought up this executive order, it regards an effort by the Trump administration through the president to stop or certainly dramatically slow collective bargaining for federal workers. Randy Irvin, who's currently the president of the National Federation of the Federal Employees, calls it the biggest assault on collective bargaining he has ever seen. Do you agree with those sentiments?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, spot on. Look, I remember when I was 12 years old when Reagan busted the PATCO workers. That was a massive issue back then, and we've heard a lot of people talk about the labor. Yes, and that labor should have done more then. Look, this is 100 times worse than PATCO ever dreamed of being. When you're talking, 700,000 people, their contracts just being taken away, and so, as I said, free speech is under attack. Unions are under attack. You look at the changes to the NLRB. You look at the situation with the Department of Labor, Department of Education, Veterans Affairs. I mean, why are all these things under attack? Medicare, Social Security. It's because, billionaires want more tax cuts for themselves. And it's been proven time and again that's not what works for America. That's not good for the American people. The working class people in America, they want their fair share. They're not asking to be rich. They just want a decent standard of living. And again, that goes back to what we call our four core issues. Living wages, adequate health care, retirement security, and having some quality of life other than just everything revolving around work.
You can see more of my conversation with UAW President Shawn Fain this Sunday on Face the Nation. Former Senate Republican leader and Majority Leader Mitch McConnell criticizes the Trump administration's current peace talks with Russia. Our political panel will weigh in on that and much else next, right here on America Decides. Welcome back. Kentucky Republican Senator Mitch McConnell, yes, he's had his differences with President Trump over the years. Well, he's going to have another one because this is what he's saying about the president's current efforts to end the war in Ukraine. He's saying the president and his top advisors are pursuing a, quote, illusionary peace that he said could be ended to a place where the headline reads as follows: Russia wins, America loses. I want to bring in our political panel, Chuck Rocha. He formerly served as a senior advisor on Bernie Sanders' 2016 and 2020 presidential campaigns, and Mara Gillespie served as an advisor to former House Speaker John Boehner and former Congressman Adam Kinzinger. As you can see, they are both joining me from New York. So give my regards to Broadway. Mara, let me start with you. Even the president acknowledged this week that it's possible, he said, and I'm quoting him, that Vladimir Putin might be slow-walking the talks on ending the war with Ukraine. The momentum that the White House was so insistent was building a week ago seems to have dissipated.
Absolutely, and I'm glad that the president's recognizing that. It's taken a little longer than I would have probably hoped for him to realize that the partner he should be working with is not Putin, despite his affinity for him. It's become a real problem for the Republican Party because it's not what we've long stood for. We've always recognized Russia to be an adversary. And yes, they're not economically threatening to us, but their partnership with China and other bad actors like Iran has been a problem. So I think it's really important for him to at least come to this recognition. I just wish he would take further steps back from Putin and recognize the role that Ukraine plays for our foreign policy and our standing in the world.
Chuck, your take?
Look, I think that Mitch McConnell said what a lot of other Republicans are scared to say. The Republican Party for a long time, and I have run lots of campaigns against Republicans, and I'll keep it in mind that Mara's sitting right next to me so she don't hit me. But we come at this from an angle as Democrats, and normally we're fighting Republicans who are very hawkish. They love a good war. They love military spending. And so what the former leader is saying is what a lot of them are thinking, but because he's not running for office again, he ain't scared to say it.
Chuck, I want to read to you something that crossed our attention from Politico about Democrats and the aftermath, the continuing sober aftermath of the 2024 election. Quote, "It's been months since Democrats suffered a devastating defeat at the polls. For all the talk about the party's need for change, few seem actually willing to make the leap." True?
True, but also there's a glimmer of hope. True that a lot of the things in the party are staying the same, mainly consultants and folks in power, which is hard to move them out of. But I do see something happening. I'll draw everybody's attention to Pennsylvania and a state Senate special election just 3 days ago in a district that Trump won by 15 points. A Democrat won that in Lancaster County, which is the first time a Democrat represents that county since 1889. This is the old thing that Carville's talking about. Do you want to sit back and just let him blow up, or do we do that and do something different? That's what I think Democrats need to learn from this.
The name checking there, James Carville, ladies and gentlemen. Diagnose for us, Chuck, while I have you, the Wisconsin Supreme Court race and the 2 special elections in Florida.
It's going to come down to be a nail-biter. In Wisconsin first, it's a 50-50 state. It's a state where it's half Democrat, half Republican. I think the Democrats who have a better turnout in special elections win that. In the 2 races in Florida, they're close. They're both Republican plus 30 for Donald Trump. If Democrats get anywhere near winning that where you can smell a victory, it's a big setback for Republicans.
Mara, will any of those 3 races that Chuck described have any effect on Republican calculations and calculus?
Florida will, for sure.
About Trump and the agenda.
I think Florida will because you're already seeing it play out. The fact that Elise Stefanik had to renege on her, ambassadorship to the UN, that's creating quite the dynamic within leadership. But also it shows you that the Trump world recognizes that they are going to be losing people. They know that if the economic situation does not improve, voters are not going to continue to support him. And they know that the tariffs that he has been calling for will, at first and immediately, cause pains in the economic department for people as far as voters and their cost of grocery, cost of living. And so recognizing that he has about a year and change to get his agenda across the finish line, and he can't afford to lose any seats in the House or the Senate.
So, Mara, let me just continue with this line of questioning with you, because we're going to have these races on Tuesday, Wisconsin and Florida. And as that happens, House Republicans, Senate Republicans really are going to need to roll up their sleeves to get in negotiations about what tax cuts do you include, what budget cuts do you impose, and how do you put all that together with votes and politics. These races might inject some caution in there, you think?
They might, but what's going to be most important is that they come together and stay unified. They cannot afford to lose anyone, and that means, they're going to have to really look at Thomas Massie as their one out because he's unlikely to join them. But they're going to have to stay unified, stay together, and they cannot afford 1 or 2 defections here. They're really going to have to come together and find a solution that they all can agree upon to get across the finish line.
Coming to us from the bright lights of New York City, Chuck Rocha and Mara Gillespie. Thank you very much.
Thank you, baby.
Here is a small highlight to a feverish news cycle, because they basically all are feverish news cycles, folks. Just trust me. The cherry blossoms, I'm so happy to say, have reached peak bloom in our nation's capital. D.C.'s signature flowers, a gift from Japan, we should remind ourselves, flourishing earlier than expected for the 6th year in a row. They're expected to last for 10 days, just in time for the city's annual Cherry Blossom Festival. Isn't that great? As the Canadian Prime Minister pushes back against President Trump's tariffs, the mayor of Toronto says they may ruin the U.S.-Canada relationship so strong, may ruin it forever. We'll speak with her next, right here.
The old relationship we had with the United States, based on deepening integration of our economies and tight security and military cooperation, is over.
Welcome back. That was Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney reacting to President Trump's new auto tariffs. I'm joined now by Toronto Mayor Olivia Chow. Madam Mayor, it's great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us. The President of the United States and the Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney spoke today. Both governments released a statement. President Trump on social media said it was an extremely productive call. We agree on many things. Prime Minister Carney's office said it was a constructive call, but also that he informed the president that retaliatory tariffs to protect Canadian workers and our economy will commence if, in fact, tariffs begin from the United States on April 2nd. Based on what those two statements say, do you think this call in any way softened the hostility that has recently become so pronounced between these two longtime friends and allies?
I believe so. Productive, constructive. Those are very positive words. It just now needs to be translated to action. I'm here in Washington, joined by Americans, Canadians, and Mexican mayors. There was a room full, there was a lot of us saying, united in one voice, saying this trade war is going to hurt Americans, Mexicans, and Canadians. It's going to make life more unaffordable. The cost of building homes, buying a car, or getting parts to fix your car, or groceries, all those essential things, it's going to go up and people are going to lose their jobs. But why? We are friends, we're allies. Come on, let's work together. So that is a good first step, good conversation to have together. And at least there's a dialogue. Mm-hmm. But now we need to be translated into a collective sigh of relief if things gets negotiated properly at a table where people can just talk and come up with an agreement that is a win-win-win for all three countries.
Is it meaningful to you, Madam Mayor, that in this social media post from the President, no reference to the 51st state, no reference to Governor Trudeau?
That's a good beginning.
Because that's not just a minor thing in Canada. It's not a minor irritant.
Not at all.
It's the front, isn't it?
It is threatening our identity as Canadians. We are proud Canadians. We believe in taking care of each other with Medicare. We have our own culture and our identity. And that's very precious for Canadians. And it's not necessarily just a joke to be always, like it wasn't one time. It wasn't, maybe it started a joke, but it repeat 4 or 5 times. And the governor term, I'm glad that's done in terms of the governor. I hope we never hear the 51st state again, because Canadians are saying our elbows are out. You know, we like to watch hockey, so.
How would you say the last 6 weeks have changed the mindset of Canadians in relationship to the United States? Do they feel wounded? Do they feel treated in a way they'd never accustomed themselves or thought about being treated by America?
They've discovered that we are proud Canadians. So it did something in a way that reminded us who we are and how we need to shop local, how we need to be more independent, how we need to be even stronger. But that sense of unity is there. And that strength, that resilience. We said, we came out of COVID doing very well. Our numbers were actually, quite good. We had a lot of people vaccinated and
did better than America, is what you're saying.
I was about to say that, but thank you for saying that. Yes. It provoked a sense of, we are Canadians, right? And it also made us start looking at our neighbors. We've always have taken it for granted that we are best allies. We still are. We have wonderful relationship with Americans. And today, when we were talking as mayors across the border, we said we will continue that wonderful relationship. We'll build on it. But it's just the government's policy is a bit hard to take.
Right, and it's having
hurting.
materially different effects because now Americans can't bid on things in Canada, in your city.
That's right.
Certain products from America are no longer welcome, no longer going to be purchased, no longer going to be up for sale.
That's right.
This will have real effects on the ground.
Absolutely. We are seeing that there are some companies that are hesitant in investing because all this uncertainty, both sides of the border. We're hearing people starting to say, I'm worried about my jobs, okay? And folks that, the mayor are saying, oh my God, what's going to happen to the auto sector? Our entire town is dependent on it. And whether if you're steel workers, United Steelworkers, American, Canadian, or Mexican, you're still steel workers. All of this tariff is going to hurt everybody. But for what reason? And yes, we understand that people need to have a better cost of living, more affordable living.
But when President Trump says Canada needs us more than we need Canada, how do you react to that?
Well, we all need each other. We together as Canadian, Mexican, Americans, we need each other. We're never alone.
But with that comes the implication that the United States can break you.
Well, excuse me? Where do you think the electricity, the oil, the precious minerals, where the auto parts comes from? It goes back and forth 5 or 6 times before a car is made. It's so integrated now. You're going to try to break something. When you break something, it goes into pieces. How are you going to repair it? And it's not so simple. It's easy to break things. It's much harder to rebuild. I think right now what we need to do is build some decent housing so people don't have to worry about housing. Homelessness is a problem. Mental health is a problem. You're seeing the drug addiction. There's lots gun violence is a problem. There are lots we can do together. Rather than breaking things, let's build together.
Toronto Mayor Olivia Chow, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
It's called abundance liberalism. What is it, and why are people arguing about it? We'll speak with someone who wrote a book about it next, right here on America Decides. Welcome back. It's no secret our country is grappling with a wide range of issues brought about by what we lack, including workers, housing, clean energy, reliable infrastructure. And our politics reflects frustration over what we lack. Interestingly, a new book argues the United States can rectify its major problems by renewing or creating, maybe, something called the politics of abundance. One of its authors, Derek Thompson, joins me now. Derek, thanks for joining us. I want to start with the way the book opens, because politics is sometimes, not always, but sometimes about a vision, something that is not yet realized, but that can be realized if certain choices are made. And the book opens with a very, very seductive portrait of what life could be like if different choices are made. Outline what that different life looks like.
Well, sure. You wake up in 2050, and we are surrounded by an abundance of not only energy, but clean energy, energy that produces an infinitude of joules, energy almost too cheap to meter, but it comes from solar and wind and enhanced geothermal and nuclear. And this abundance of energy allows us to unlock technologies that now we can only dream about, like mass desalination of water and cellular meat that doesn't require the killing of animals. We fly for vacations on supersonic jets that burn clean fuel. There are drones that deliver pills that are manufactured in low orbit in space that extend our lives and improve our health. And there's artificial intelligence that makes us smarter about the world without eliminating human work, rather allowing us to make it more efficient so we can all share in its abundance as well. And of course, all this is tied together with effective governance and an abundance of housing, which is something that not only we lack nationally, but we lack very much here in San Francisco, the city that I'm in. So you're right, this is a semi-utopian vision of the world that we can have in 2050. And what we try to do in this book is kick people off with this vignette of the world that we truly think we can have, and then smash cut into the world that we do have, which is a world where we are getting in our own way in terms of not building housing, not building energy, not building transit, not building infrastructure, and not having effective governance throughout the country.
And Derek, in this world that you just described, what jobs do people perform? What wages do they earn? And how long is their work week?
Well, their jobs can be very similar to the jobs that we have now, but the thing that we specify in the open is that their work week is shorter. You know, one of the lovely things about technology in human history is that it has typically reduced the hours of necessary human labor. If you look at countries around the world, as they get richer, they tend to work less. So we imagine a world in which people start their long weekends on Thursday afternoon because we're so much more productive with the technologies at our disposal, which are used well. We all have 3-day weekends, and people can enjoy vacations that now are a little bit more logistically complicated on a 2-day weekend over a 3-day weekend. So I think it's important to give people a sense that if we get a lot of these choices right, the world can be better not only at the material realm of more houses, more energy, but really at the human realm. We can be happier and healthier too.
Derek, you're old enough, and so am I. I'm considerably older than you, to remember the very aspirational and very enthusiastic embrace of technology in the late 1990s, all the things that would be possible with connectivity, productivity gains, the ability to bring thoughts together from disparate places. Lots of those things happened, but very few people so optimistic then were aware of or even hazarding speculation about negative consequences of technology, many of which have manifested themselves, and some might argue are right up against the value of those things we gained. Do you have any thought that the utopian world you described might also have ravaging downsides that you haven't yet calculated?
Well, look, I like to say that progress is not the elimination of problems. Progress is the replacement of one set of problems with a better set of problems. So I imagine that in a world of housing abundance and energy superabundance and more science discoveries that extend human life, we're going to solve problems that exist today, whether it's inflammation and dementia and various forms of cancer. But maybe it'll create new sets of problems. I just hope that they're a better set of problems. There's another part of your question, though, that I think is really interesting and that we only slightly touch on in the book, but I find a really fascinating transition in the last 50 years, 60 years, is that if you look at the first half of the 20th century, innovation, invention, technology, this was about the physical world. We built houses and we built bridges and we built planes and cars. It's only in the last few decades that what we think of as technology has been funneled into the digital realm. I think digital tools are fantastic. I'm talking to you over a computer connection, and this is something we couldn't necessarily do 10 or certainly 20 years ago. But certainly a vision of this book is that we have to get back into the practice of building things in the physical realm, starting with housing. And it's important to me as a Democrat, as a liberal, that if you look at the 5 states with the highest rates of homelessness, they are governed by Democrats. If you look at the places where working class folks are leaving and moving to cheaper parts of the country, they tend to be cities and states that are governed by Democrats. Unaffordability is a massive political issue right now. It might have been the singular political issue that tipped the election to Donald Trump in 2024. And right now, I think a lot of liberals and progressives aren't doing their share to emphasize and prioritize affordability in their politics. And so there's a part of the book that is absolutely about the technology we could pull forward into the present if we're smart enough about an invention agenda. But this is also about an abundance agenda of the things we know how to build, like houses, and we just aren't building because our processes are getting in our own way.
Derek Thompson, co-author of Abundance. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
That does it for today. I'll be back with another edition of America Decides Monday at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report starts right now.